Okay, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Allahumma allimna ma yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa zidna 'ilman wa 'amalan ya Rabbil Alameen, amma ba'd. So before the break, we were reading this work by Imam al-Muhasibi, which is called Treatise for the Seekers of Guidance. And it's basically foundational concepts of Islamic spirituality. The next section, the Imam, the author, he says, لا تصاحب إلا عاقلا تقيا ولا تجالس إلا عالما بصيرا. He says, only keep the company of people who are intelligent and God-fearing, and only sit in the presence of insightful, scholarly people or knowledgeable people. So the author here is emphasizing the role that company plays in your spirituality. See, when we think about spirituality, a lot of us think about it in a personal way. Spirituality is my personal journey, it's my personal relationship with God. That's how we think about it typically. And so we think about how do I pray better? How do I recite more Quran? How can I become more righteous and pious? We think very personally about spirituality. The author highlights that no, there is definitely an element of the company you keep that affects your spirituality. And I think that's a perfect topic to discuss today as we come together here, is as we try to grow spiritually, as we try to improve as Muslims, strengthen our relationship with Allah, we cannot do it alone. That is not how our religion is built. It's not one of asceticism. I should say, it's not one of renunciation. It's not one of rahbaniyah, where you say, I'm just going to go sit in a cave all by myself and not talk to anybody and just worship by myself. That is not what is an Islamic teaching. The Prophet ﷺ, when he established a Muslim community, when he preached Islam to people, there was a strong communal element. The idea that Muslims should stay in the company of other Muslims. Now someone might say, yeah, okay, but is there a problem with staying with non-Muslims? And the answer would be that so long as they do not influence the way you think about things, and they don't influence the way you function in your life, there's no problem. Absolutely not. The issue is that when we begin to form our views and the way we think about things based on the people around us who may be non-Muslim, and then their views are not non-Islamic ideas, that's when it starts to pose a problem. Do you understand that idea? And this is a very serious issue, by the way. I'm not trying to alarm anybody or something, but this is a very serious thing. We have a lot of deconstruction that we need to do. A lot of deconstruction of the ideas that we have and how we think about the world. For this, I'm not going to delve too much into it, but for this, you might want to read the work of Charles Taylor. Charles Taylor talks a lot about, for those of you who are into sociology, the work of Charles Taylor is really good here, where he highlights what our concept of a self is, the modern concept of a self. More recently, people who've built on his works and tried to synthesize his works with other readers is a writer by the name of Carl Trueman. Trueman has written The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. That's one really good work of his, actually. There he combines between the work of Alistair MacIntyre, Charles Taylor, and a third writer to explain why it is that we look at the world the way we do, and why it is that we think about ourselves the way we think about ourselves. And it's actually really fascinating how so much of the way we think, we don't even realize that it doesn't have to be that way. There's a famous story. David Foster Wallace made this very famous in his commencement speech, where It's an anecdote about two fish that are swimming. And as they're swimming, and they're young fish, and they pass by an older fish. And the older fish looks at them and goes, "How's the water, boys?" And the two young fish kind of give him a half, answer. And after they swim by, they look at each other and they go, "What water? What water is this guy talking about?" The story, what it's meant to illustrate is, so many of the most obvious things of life, they're so obvious, but they're lost on us. Because we naturally assume them, we don't even realize that that's how we think about things and that's how we look at the world. See, the older fish had explored the ocean. He knew that you didn't have to exist in fish. It's possible to exist outside of fish. These two younger fish had not explored. All they knew was water. So to them, water was virtually non-existent. It's all they knew. So their minds could not comprehend the idea that there might be something other than water. For a lot of us, the way we think about life right now is the only way that we can imagine that life could be thought of. And that's to do with the surroundings we find ourselves in. Do you know where a lot of people get like a shock? When they travel to other parts of the world. Do you understand? And you meet people who think about life so differently. How many of y'all experienced that before? Travel to a different country, maybe when you were younger, maybe when you were like 9, 10, 11, and you met relatives of yours, and they were making decisions about life that made no sense to you. You ever seen that? And they were totally fine with it. And then, I'm sorry, but Westernized You pitched up, and maybe me too, and we were like, yo, you can't do that, man. Like, what's this? Don't you know, like, they can't make you do that. And you're like, bro, they're like, you don't even understand. That's just not how it is over here. Y'all never experienced that? Any examples of this? Nobody? Yeah?
Going back home, and my cousins have exams at such a young age.
Oh, right, yeah, exams at a young age, and we're like, who has exams at a young age? Okay, yeah, that's definitely an example. Beating children, oh yeah. We went straight for the jugular with that one. Yeah, that's true though. It's true. No, that's a real one. It's definitely. I bet you some people are like, you don't have to go back home or some other country for that, bro. You just come to my house. Let's not incriminate our parents. Okay. Yes.
You might be shocked, but like their like laws in like their country might be different than ours.
Okay. Yeah.
Their laws are so different.
Yeah. You can't criticize the king. No. For example, there's certain countries you can't criticize the king. It's a criminal behavior to criticize the king. And you're like, we have freedom of speech, right? Canadian pitches up, it's freedom of speech, yo. And they're like, this is not Canada. No, like for real, you end up in jail, straight up. And we struggle to wrap our heads around it. Because it's just so normal to us that, of course, freedom of speech, I can say what I want. We don't realize that things could be different. What's the classic example? I'm surprised nobody said this. I think everyone wants to say it, but they don't want to say it. Yeah? Bribes? Okay, that's another one for sure. Where it's just so normal, right? Okay, but there's another one. Okay, that's one too. Segregation, for sure. Another one. Is nobody gonna say marriage? Where you go there and you meet somebody and they're like, yeah, I'm getting married to them. And you're like, oh, so what's he like or what's she like? And they're like, I have no idea. And you're like, hold up, right? Like, how are you about to do that? They're like, yeah, the families decided. Did they ask you? No, kind of. They told me the date, right? Do you know what I'm saying? And again, Westernized You, with all of your rights and your autonomy, right? Your self-determination, you're like, no. I'm just not going to show up. And they're like, no, you can't embarrass the family. right? And you start to see, if you think about it, it's a collectivistic versus individualistic clash right there. But we can't even imagine that someone would do that and be happy about it. You know what's crazy? And this is a lot of what Taylor talks about, Truman talk about. He gives an example. Truman gives an example. He says, if you go ask your parents, hey, was your job fulfilling? Imagine you went to your dad and said, hey, you know the job you had? Was that fulfilling? Do you find like job satisfaction? No, a lot of our parents would say, ish hada, right? Like, yeah, ye kya hai? Like, what do you mean job satisfaction? I had to work and I had to make money. Who asked the question about satisfaction? But that's where we come along, right? And we're like, nah, yeah, I'm gonna quit this job for that job satisfaction and stuff. Because we make our decisions based on how it feels. Very much on how it satisfies us. We turn inward. This is what he calls the psychologized self. Truman calls it. He says we become all about, well, how does it make me feel? And am I satisfied? I'm not saying it's wrong. Please, don't get me wrong. What I'm saying is you probably have never even thought if there's another way to function in life. That just seems so natural. Of course you'd care about job satisfaction. What do you mean, of course? Many of our parents never cared about job satisfaction. It paid the bills, so they worked. You get what I'm saying? And I share that to highlight how so many of the ideas that we have and the way that we think about the world, it's so obvious to us that we've never questioned it. And if those ideas are incorrect, you will struggle with your faith. You will absolutely struggle with your faith. Because maybe you just absorbed the ideas from those around you, from the education system you came through. That's the company that you kept. Those were the lessons that you learned. And they shaped how you think about things. He says, and this is why it's so beautiful to sit with people who think differently. You might say beautiful. No, it's uncomfortable. How many of y'all would agree it's a little uncomfortable nowadays to sit with somebody who disagrees with what you think? Yeah, we like echo chambers, isn't it? We like echo chambers. I mean, that's what online has promoted. There's a book called The Coddling of the American Mind. This idea of we create these spaces where we don't want to hear any counter idea, ever. Why? Because it makes us uncomfortable. We feel challenged. But then as a result, we never question our own assumptions. And then we never grow. Do you understand? There's a lot to learn when you get the opportunity to question, wait, this is what I've believed all along, but what if it's wrong? Do you get what I'm saying? What if there's a different way to be in the world? What if there's a different way to think about things? And so, keeping the company of those, the author says, keep the company of those who are intelligent. Now, everyone believes they're intelligent, right? But really, I think we could say people who reflect and think deeply about life. A lot of us like the idea of it, but maybe we don't know how to do that. How many of you have heard advice given maybe in a khutbah or something? Yeah, guys, we need to reflect more. How many of y'all have heard that? And how many of y'all have said, what does that mean? Like reflect, do what? If I told you reflect right now, what would you do? You close your eyes. And then what? Right? You close your eyes. And then what? Like we don't really know how to reflect. And so it's something to learn. The art of reflection. Half of there's a saying attributed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Nisful ilmi husnul su'al. Half of knowledge is to ask beautiful questions. Because the answers you get will be based on the questions you ask. And so it's important to ask the right questions. Do you get what I'm saying? It's important to ask the right questions. And that's what being around people who are thoughtful and reflective can help you with. It'll help you reflect. Okay? I mean, that's why I'm with y'all. That's why I'm here to sit with y'all. Because mashallah, you guys are reflective and thoughtful people. No, wallahi, mashallah. May Allah bless you all. Okay, I'm going to finish with one hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that the author mentions, where the Prophet ﷺ was asked, أَيُّ جُلَسَائِنَا خَيْرٌ? Which of our companions, which of our friends are the best? He says, and this is so beautiful, he says, مَنْ ذَكَّرَكُمْ بِاللَّهِ رُؤْيَتُهُ. The one whom, when you see them, they remind you of God. Subhanallah. That just the sight of them reminds you of God. How does that happen? Any ideas? How could just seeing somebody remind you of God? Look, there are certain things in life which I would claim would remind anybody and everybody of God. When you drive by a masjid, does it remind you of God? Just driving by it, you think about Allah and about Islam. Yeah. Right? When someone mentions Umrah or Hajj or something, I think of God. When someone talks about, oh, Ramadan's coming, I think of God. All these things remind you of God. They remind you of Allah. How is it that a human could remind you of Allah? Yeah. Subhanallah. Yes, that's one way, definitely. The topics you talk about. How often do we talk to our friends about God or even just meaningful, deep topics? Not just relationships or sports. Like I'm talking about like existential level questions. Y'all have friends like that? Those are the real ones. Those are the real ones. The ones that got you questioning life. In a good way, in a good way. No, for real. For real, those are blessings. You know what's crazy? Is people like that, unfortunately, in our society, and it's been the case. It's been the case since the very beginning. People like that who always want to kind of go deep in the convo, they have always been kind of frowned upon. Do you know what I'm saying? For example, you know, like you're talking about, you know, someone had a skit about this. It was a youth pastor skit. Dude's funny. So he made a skit about how youth pastors go deep on everything. So like it's Halloween and people are wearing masks and the guy's like, yeah, but what about all of us and the masks that we wear on a daily basis? You know, like, you're just talking about like, hey, well, what mask you wearing for Halloween? And this dude just goes deep with it. Yeah, but what about the mask you're wearing every day? And you're like, dude, like, it's not that deep. You know, we're just talking about Halloween. You know what I'm saying? It's like, you have these skits of the Muslim guys doing it too, right? Oh, brother, you're concerned about, you know, your lineup. Are you concerned about standing in line in the prayer? Like something like that, you know? You know those videos? And everyone's kind of like, dude, just chill, man. It's not the time for it. Like, we're just trying to talk about something normal, right? Now, I'm not saying you need to turn every conversation to like, you know, you're going to end up in the grave. Like, that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying, if you have a friend who, subhanallah, will remind you in that moment of the bigger picture of life, that friend is a blessing. That friend is a blessing. You know that friend who, with all the fun, keeps it real? That friend is a blessing. That's the friend that you see and that reminds you of God. And that could be many ways, the things they talk about. Yeah. What are some other ways? That a friend, yeah. Their actions, subhanallah. You know that friend who just gets up silently to go pray? Hey, where are you going? Oh, I'm just going to go pray. Why don't you tell me? You know, why don't you tell me? Oh, let me go pray too. They remind you of God through their actions. And we learn this not only to look for such friends, but to become such friends. May we be such people for the people around us, right? Everybody wants such a friend. Somebody's got to be that friend, right? Okay, what else? One last thing. Yeah. The way they dress. If there's something about their dress that reminds them of God, right? Ostensibly just something that stands out. It's a form of da'wah. It's a reminder to other people of Allah, right? So the one whose appearance reminds you of God. Number two, the second quality of the best friend the Prophet ﷺ described, the one whose speech increases you in knowledge. The one that when they speak, you actually learn something, right? It doesn't mean like every time they're preaching or teaching, but subhanAllah, just, you know, Imam Zayd, who wrote the commentary for this, he adds in his commentary, he says, the best teacher is the one who can educate by means of their glance. The one who can educate as much as they can through their words, they can educate equally through their silence. You ever been around people whose silence educates? You'll have people, you know, subhanAllah, you ever seen that uncle or auntie, mashallah, who's just... No, it's you think it's a small thing. They're not saying a word, but they're reminding us of what? They're reminding us to remember God. And then maybe that's not even their intention. But subhanAllah, I grew up seeing my mother do that all the time. And hey, before anybody starts with the bid'ah story, I'm not here to talk about the bid'ah story about this, okay? Let's just pause with that, okay? The idea I'm trying to say is that there are certain things people do outwardly that just their actions, their silence, remind us of God. And finally, the one whose actions remind us of the hereafter. And that should be, you know, definitely one feature in our friends, inshallah. I mean, that's really why we come together here, is how we can grow to be such people. And if we don't have such people in our lives, maybe we'll find them here. Maybe we'll find them here. This will help us grow into such people, but also connect us with people who are such people. And inshallah, I hope that we've been able to do that so far to some extent. We hope to continue doing this, inshallah, with your support, with your attendance, inshallah, at these weekly events. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from all of us. May He make us such people and connect us with such people so that we may truly grow in our spirituality. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Jazakumullahu khairan to everybody for coming out for this.